Perfect. Excellent. Okay. Fab. Right. Okay. So wave frantically or indicate otherwise if something isn't working with the slideshow, but we'll kick off. Thank you again. Oh, so Richard, can you not see any slides? Is there a problem with slides? Okay, 2 seconds.
Yeah, I can just see a big TS.
Maybe just launch it again, Tex. I can still see the slides, but maybe just quit it and launch it again.
Yeah, I think I will. Okay, 2 seconds. Let's try this again.
I can see you fine.
That's not what we want though. We want the slides. Yeah, PowerPoint's having a bit of a meltdown on this side as well. I've got like 3 tabs of the same slideshow open. Right, okay. Hopefully this'll do the deed. Right. How does that look?
Looks good.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. And I can kind of see you all as well. So fabulous. Let's get cracking. So yes, community data journey that we're going to go through what it entails. And obviously I'm Texa, I'm the community-led Marine Biodiversity Monitoring Project Officer, kind of, in that I'm technically moving on from that role as of this week. But for this capacity, I am that role today. And Ed Thompson, our Marine Data Advisor, is also joining us to kind of take us through some of the aspects of this journey. So the very first step in collecting any marine data at all is deciding what you actually want to look at, what you want to survey and what you want to monitor. And while we're all really excited and really keen to just jump in, it is worth stepping back a little bit and trying to make a bit of a plan, really drilling down into what is the question ultimately you're trying to answer. That is the underpinning kind of undertone that will help really drive the design of your survey and help you answer questions that you're looking to answer. That will be guided by the habitat that you're looking at, because not every method suits every habitat. So that will be quite important. And things are different for rocky shores, for sandy shores, for more tidal areas, for mud flats. So there's lots of different things to think about. So sitting down and really planning out a survey is really, really a useful thing to do and helps kind of ground you and prepare you before you begin. So some thoughts that might help with planning and really diving into everything that's on the slide is a really good idea, just to allow you to set your own expectations as well. So things like what is the capacity of your group and the skill set that you have. Lots of people are obviously restricted in terms of what times they can offer up for voluntary work, whether that's after work in certain times of day. And what kind of skill sets are in your community group? Lots of people have science backgrounds in various ways. There's also other things that can come in and be really useful in terms of equipment design, engineering skills, people management skills as well for managing volunteers once you're out and about. So there's lots of things, and it's useful to kind of go through your group members and have a wee think about these different skills that people can bring. And it's a useful thing to also kind of identify the need for the survey and what it might lead to later down the line as well. So a bit of forward planning. And thinking also about whether this effort is going to be a one-off or whether this could be a long-term monitoring effort. So how frequently you're going to be looking at doing this. That will come into your tides potentially, especially if it's an intertidal, and some habitats aren't exposed even at the lowest tides, so it might be subtidal work. So all that sort of physical environmental information is really important. Looking at your equipment needs is also really useful. So what you have, what you don't have, whether you can borrow, what types of different imaging equipment is most useful. Everything is equal in terms of quality. So that's something to think about. And then, of course, thinking about when the data and when the project is actually unfolding, are there some people or a certain person who could potentially take the lead on that, whether that's also just managing the project as it's running, or when the data is actually being collected, being in charge of the quality and the verification of that data. And then finally, the data itself, where will that be stored? Where is that going to live? It's a difficult question, and everyone struggles with where data can be stored, especially when it's very large data. So that's worth thinking about as well. So just again, looking a little bit more into the data storage sorts of thing. It is an important consideration because you could end up with a lot of data. Imagery data can be very, very heavy in terms of storage needs. So it's really worth thinking about if you have the right tools to store that before you go out into the field. There's actually a couple of resources online that allow you to kind of estimate how much data a certain type of method might result in. You can use it for acoustic data, but you can also use it for video data as well, which might give you an idea of how much you're looking at and how many hard drives or how much cloud storage you could need. With hard drives, you've got a decision on terms of what type. So you have the solid state drives, which are an electronic system with no moving parts. They might run faster, but they also degrade over time, which makes it maybe not the best for longer term storage. Hard drive disks are what most people have. That's the spinning disk that actually writes data. They're very fragile and they really mustn't be moved when they're actually in use, but they're very good for long-term storage. And then, of course, you can consider the cloud storage systems versus physical storage. But obviously, cloud storage can be costly and sometimes it's difficult to work with your data over an internet connection. So we've talked a little bit about the planning, and I think it would be really nice now to just go into our community-led marine handbook that I hope most of you have a physical copy of. We do have some left, so do forgive me a wee buzz if you'd like a physical copy. We should have enough. So if you're familiar with this, it's a series of different methods where you can standardize your various methodology for looking at different habitats and surveying and monitoring them. So you've got your two, the first ones in the category 1 are your species image libraries, which is basically a way of documenting what species are actually there. And it might be really useful for creating a local ID guide or outreach and community engagement, and can be quite similar to the BioBlitz events that you get. So that's quite a nice tool to use when you're kind of first making a stab at finding out what is in your local area. Your photo station, the other method in this category, is really good for documenting changes to your intertidal or your shore zone. It's basically sticking up a camera in the same place and taking a picture of that particular location through time. So it's really, really good for documenting seasonal changes and longer term changes as well. So that's quite a nice and relatively easy method to use. And it's land-based or intertidal. Moving on to category 2s, which are looking kind of at the rocky shore area. So we've got rocky shore zonation, which is basically looking at how species are zoned through the shore as the shore moves from the high to the low. And it groups, it helps you kind of group different species into these different zones. And it basically allows you to document exactly the location of each zone on your shoreline. And then following on from that, you have your rocky shore profile, which gives you a steepness of your shore. And that's quite important because certain species do better or worse depending on the steepness and the exposure of that shore. And it also allows you to build a visual representation, almost a slice, a map that shows you your shore profile. And then finally, we've got the quadrat method, which a lot of you will be really familiar with, which is a really useful one for looking at the kind of ecology and biological species of each shore zone. And when you do this over time, it's also a really good opportunity to look at changes over time as well. So in the third category, we've got typically subtidal methods, which are a little bit more difficult to kind of get organized, but they're really useful for the habitats that you can't really easily get to on shore. So we've got the underwater marine life observation, which gives you a snapshot of your underwater marine life, and that can be using a kayak or a SUP, drop-down video ROV or a pole cam, for example, and it can really be useful for your look-see survey, so looking and seeing what's there, and also building an idea of what other ways you could look more in detail at your habitats. The video's transect is basically a straight line across the survey area to determine the location of species and habitats in that area. And it's really good, again, for changes over time and repeating surveys over time. It's typically not recommended to do a transect with an ROV because it's quite difficult to maintain a straight line with an ROV. It's just a tricky thing to do, but it's really good for other kind of imagery-based methods, like using your drop-down video, for example. And then finally, we've got habitat mapping and habitat quality. So our mapping is our size of a habitat and the boundary. Really good for shallow water intertidal as well. And then habitat quality is looking at the health of certain habitats. So in the handbook, that focuses on blue mussels and seagrass, and you can actually use quadrats and transects similar to the method 2.3 Rocky Shore Quadrat. And that gives you all sorts of things like substrate type, habitat coverage, and the canopy height of seagrass, etc. So that's a really quick show through of the handbook, which loads of you will be really familiar with as anyway. So hopefully that's not too shocking and new news. Oh, yeah, here we go. Subtidal and intertidal for the two last ones as well. So I've alluded to the fact that we've kind of graded these different methods in terms of how easy and how a bit more involved they are. So the underwater ones, subtidal ones, are also a little bit more tricky, and the easier ones are the photo station, the species image library. So that might help you when you think about using these. It might help you or have an idea of what extra things you might need to support that method. So we've looked at our methods, the things that are in the handbook. I want to talk a little bit about metadata, and you might be quite familiar with this and use this quite a lot. But metadata is as important as the actual data that you are collecting in terms of what animal you've seen or what habitat you've mapped. It provides context to the observations that you've collected, and it might be really important to understand what you've seen in greater detail down the line. And sometimes it's useful to explore patterns and potential bias in the data. So that it's really, really important. And what that actually consists of are things like time and location information, so date, start and end times of your survey, GPS locations. We've also got information on the person taking the data, the survey name and the observer name is actually quite important. So if you've got a question later down the line, you can go to the person and go, what does that mean, or what species was that? And it really does help to have that linked. Environmental information is, again, really important, and it can provide a little bit of context as to maybe why your survey cut short because the weather got rubbish, or tidal information, temperature information. All of that might influence actually what you're seeing. And then finally, we have equipment information. And again, that is really important because we have equipment that changes sometimes. We get a different type of camera, different type of video recording system. And if that changes between surveys in the same place, it might influence what you can and cannot see. So having that information is really important. And there are sections in the handbook forms that allow you to note this information down. And speaking of the field survey sheets, so these in the handbook are paper copies of the kind of in the field information that you can take during your surveys. So you can transfer these to tablets. I've used them on waterproof laptops before. And they are useful if you get these organised in order before you go out. They are difficult to use in that obviously you're dealing with lots of paper forms out in the field, and that has a whole bunch of issues associated with it. So we're making some progress to try and make this a little bit more easy to use practically. But however, what we have right now is this system. So just make sure that you've got hopefully enough volunteers that you can have someone who's actually noting the data and someone identifying that. Sometimes if you're doing both, it's quite difficult, especially if you're wielding a pen and it's raining and clipboards everywhere. So it's just worth having a look at what your capacity is for the day of your survey. Another really good thing to do, ideally, once you've done your survey and the excitement has been and gone, and you're left with all of these data sheets, that they are input electronically quite quickly after the survey. It's really, really easy to leave that for another time, but if you do it quickly, it allows you to be present in terms of you remember what happened during the survey. You can quickly speak to somebody depending if you've got a question about what they've written down, and it just generally makes things a little bit easier, so you're not going down back to the sheets 6 months later and going, oh, I don't remember this. So that is something that's quite useful to do. So I'm going to quickly introduce the recording forms, the new ones that we have, courtesy of Ed, who's worked really hard to try and improve our recording forms. He's going to go through that, I think, a little bit if I've got the order of these slides right. But basically, this is once you've collected your data in the field, you've got all your information on those field survey sheets, and then you want to input them electronically. And these recording forms are now designed so that it's easier for you to input your data, and it's easier for us to then input that to JNCC Marine Recorder. And that is really going to be useful for the speediness of data moving through the system, and hopefully is going to make this a lot easier for everyone. So far we have a new recording sheet for the quadrat methods, for the marine life observation survey, and one that's specifically for marl and one that's specifically for seagrass. So we will go into those in a little bit because it's really worth kind of showcasing these, because they're going to hopefully improve things quite a lot. So yeah, I think what I wanted to do here is just kind of summarize what we're talking about when we're talking about the data journey as well. So we've talked about our physical methods, we've talked about taking the data in the field, and then we've got a process for what happens with all of that once it's done. So at the beginning of this horrendogram, we've got data entry, which is taking your data, get your forms done, and that's you. Bang on, fantastic. You've got some stuff written down. The next step is validation, and that's really checking over your data and starting to input it into your spreadsheets, your spreadsheet management, so making sure things are labelled really clearly and being quite consistent in your naming. So that's quite important. And then once you've done that, you've got your next stage of verification. And that's just going through your observations and kind of checking if things add up, if things are right, if you've got a species question, for example, maybe in terms of seagrass, is it Zostera marina, or is it Ripaya nulti, that sort of thing. Just double checking on these observations so that we are really confident. And that's actually a point where there's an opportunity to upskill. So if you've got folk in your group who are quite keen to really push forward with their species ID, there's sea search courses and other opportunities where you can kind of improve those skills, which is really great. And then finally, we've got the data submission. So looking at your data and going, right, what is the most appropriate repository for that? And what do I want my data to help with? What do I want it to do? And for a lot of the work that the community groups are doing, it's, data is hopefully being there and submitted so it can inform management decisions and improve knowledge gaps and help generally where we don't have a lot of knowledge about certain places or species. So again, I'm afraid I've got more horrendograms, and this is going to be a kind of theme for the next couple of slides. So we've got our submission to national databases, and this is the process you would probably go if you were just looking to submit that directly. So removing submission to NatureScot out of the system, and then just taking those data and putting them straight in. So you've kind of got your raw data collection at the beginning. You've got your analysis or any validation going on there, making sure you've got a clear format for data ownership is really important, and then choosing your repository. So there are quite a lot out there. I'm going to give an attempt to try and explain a couple of these. So some repositories pass data on to others. So iRecord is an example of this, in that it passes on to the National Biodiversity Network map, where you can then publicly see sightings. And you've got other things. You can actually submit data directly to Marine Recorder Online, who then pass that on to Marine Biological Association DASH, who then pass it on to other places. So there's quite a bit of a complexity here, and it's not an easy place to navigate. But certainly, if you have questions about particular places and you need more information on that, get in touch, because that is something we can give more information on. But all of these places that I have on the screen, you can actually submit data directly to. However, if that makes your head hurt, because it makes my head hurt, there is an easier way, which is submitting your data to NatureScot first. So it lands directly on Ed's desk. And then once we have it, we can pass it on to other repositories. So just for some context there, we've got the Marine Recorder Online orange and blue logo, and you'll see above that it says NatureScot Gems. So Gems is basically a map where it allows you to see your priority marine features as points or as polygons, and also habitat mapping if it's a PMF as well. So you've got a lot of option in terms of where those data can go. And essentially, once it's in a repository like that, it can be used and used for all sorts of different things, and essentially provide more information on something that was probably not known about before. So if we don't have the information on it, we don't know it exists. So that's why half of this is important. Lucy, you've got your hand up. I guess we could. Do you want to ask your question now? I think my internet is coping.
If I could, it is about this sort of like these data repositories, and kind of, is it a case of irrespective of which one you put it into, it will all end up in some publicly accessible place, or is that not the case? Because in terms of data, if we want to share it, we want it to go into sort of national data sets that help inform decision making, but we might also say, well, we want it to be publicly available to others as well. Is it the case that wherever you put it, that will happen, or actually are the permutations not, quite varied?
I'll take that one, Texa. So essentially, yes, as of 2025, there's an agreement between the Marine Biological Associations, DAS, and NBN to share data between each other, which means that the two submission routes, which ultimately I think on the previous slide ended up in different places, now will end up in the same place and have to end up in the same place. So it's quite complex because obviously you don't want to be duplicating any data. So they have to be really careful when they're sharing data with each other that it hasn't already been submitted elsewhere. But it's a good step forward because it essentially means that we can tie off the two different routes so that everything will appear in each database essentially. That there are some other places that you sort of can't submit to that will go elsewhere, so like industry data or potentially academic data, things like that, but obviously that's not relevant to us. There are other data journeys available, so I think it's worth mentioning. But yeah, the agreement was signed this year. There's some technical stuff to kind of get it up and running, and I think by the end of the year there should be the two-way flow of data between those two systems and essentially onward distribution, so OBIS and Eurobis to international nodes and GBIF, etc. Does that answer your question, Lucy?
Yes, it does, Ed. Thanks very much, and that's very good to hear.
Excellent, thank you, Ed. That's fantastic. That's great news, and yeah, I do scratch my head over this because there's a lot of different things all there.
Me too.
But
me too.
Yeah. Good to hear. Fantastic. Okay, I'll press on. So I think actually this is probably where Ed is going to be able to shine and be able to tell us a little bit more about Marine Recorder. Do you want to take it from here, Ed, for this part, or would you like to hang on?
That's great. Yeah, that's fine. So a quick introduction to Marine Recorder. Marine Recorder, so note Marine Recorder rather than Marine Recorder Online, has existed as a database, effectively as an access database, for at least 20 years in the past. That database was manipulated and copied over by literally copying the whole access file and sending different versions to different people and things like that, and sending it through the post, which is obviously a pretty shameful way of doing things in 2020s. So there was recently a big drive to upgrade it to Marine Recorder Online, i.e. to push the whole thing into the cloud. And whilst we're doing that, we can also have a lot of updates to what data can be entered and how it can be entered. And I'm telling you this as kind of niche, but I'm telling you this because it has an impact in terms of how we actually accept stuff as NatureScot, and consequently how we accept stuff from community groups. Marine Recorder Online has been built to allow the most complicated surveys that you might expect from people who are very deep in the scientific community, for example. So there is a huge amount of variety of different types of survey that you can do. So obviously stuff that's inshore, offshore, lots of different platforms, technical equipment, different types of analysis that you're doing. So you've got a few there. So you might just have, simple kind of species occurrence and abundance, but you might also have biotoping, physical attributes, sediment, particle size analysis, all that kind of stuff, which makes it very challenging to sort of to keep it simple when we're doing things that are more simple, because it can cater for extremely complex surveys. However, that's obviously not so useful when we're doing things like understanding the extent of the Merle bed. Actually, you're kind of taking that complexity is a little bit onerous. And this is where sort of my role really comes in, is to try and take the complexity that is available to us and to simplify it down into something that's more user-friendly for, well, not just for internally for staff, but also for community groups and a wider audience. So to just give you an idea of the complexity of Marine Recorder, I think we've got a snapshot on the next slide. Yeah, so this is showing, none of this is important, but it's just to kind of highlight the complexity. So there's a hierarchy that exists within each project, effectively within each survey, and each of those entities is, or each of those boxes is an entity, and those entities relate to each other in different ways. So you might have something which is a survey, which is where you know, let's take the example of a Merle habitat extent. You're going out looking at Merle habitats, so you have an entry form for that, so an import template, which in itself is an Excel spreadsheet. You might have a list of survey events associated with that. So when you went out, the surveyors would be attached to it. So who you went out with, the types of methods that you use, again, another spreadsheet. So if you just end up having just a very simple kind of a simple survey where you're going out and doing 1 or 2 observations, actually you still have to fill out all of these individual entities, which makes it really quite complicated for stuff which is relatively simple. So for a really complex survey, it's great, and it works really nicely. But as soon as we get to the realm of simpler stuff, it's a lot more difficult. So I think that's enough of that for horrendograms. Let's hop on to the next slide. So my role really has been, or one thing that I've tried to do recently, is to basically to combine the requirements of community groups with the complexity of Marine Recorder to produce something which can translate from a simple recording form into the mechanisms for submission to Marine Recorder, without having to add in individual entries into the Marine Recorder online platform one by one. So I've done this in Excel because I'm more familiar with Excel, but I'd love to appify it at some point. I think that would be really cool, to have a kind of Marine Recorder app that you could just put stuff into. I think that could be good. And here's just a quick snapshot. And what I'd point you to is that you've got 3 tabs there. I think this is the general marine life observation form, I think. And you've got 3 tabs. There's a load of hidden tabs in the spreadsheet as well, but those are the ones, they're hidden for a reason. They're not for editing by surveying personnel, but the tabs take the individual entries within these tabs and then turn them into Marine Recorder format through a list of quite complex and challenging to understand formulae that I don't really want to have to pass on to anyone or explain to anyone, but just to say that they do work. And so yeah, so we've got this form with the instructions, and then 2, and I'm simplifying it down as much as possible to only 2 tabs here. It's not, because of the way that biotoping works at a different level in the hierarchy to species level information. I kind of have to have it in 2 different tabs. Otherwise we end up with the kind of old style form of, so those of you who've been doing this for a number of years might remember the forms from sort of 2, 3, 4 years ago, where you end up with a long string of boxes on a single sheet, but the boxes are all of different size, which is kind of counterintuitive for what you should be filling out when, and it's kind of a messy way of doing it. So hopefully this iteration is a little bit simpler, and we've just got the complexity behind the scenes. Should we move to the next one? Yeah, so this is for the quadrats, and just to the way that it works in this particular sheet, and I'm not going to explain in too much detail because I think ultimately it's worth just having a play around and having a look at the spreadsheets and gaining some familiarity with them. But ultimately, this is a rocky shore zonation. So if you look in column M, you've got zone, upper, middle, and lower. And the point of those 3 zones is that you're splitting that into biotopes. And that feeds into the biotope further down the line. So actually, you'll have different survey events and sample events that are created by this row, effectively 12s, because you've got 4 quadrats in each zone. So all of that's quite technical, but it's not that important for you to know necessarily. It's just more important to understand that it's not a simple beast that we're dealing with, and yeah, can be a little bit challenging to work with. And if you pop onto the next slide. So this is looking at the species tab. So what we've got here is we're trying to link everything that we've done in the surveys tab with what we've actually seen. If you Marine Recorder only accepts things by AFIR ID. AFIR ID is it's effectively a key, a numerical key, which is attached to every single scientific taxon. Of course, that means that it doesn't understand common names. It doesn't even understand the scientific name. So there's a lookup table in the background that's trying to translate between the scientific name that you've entered in column C with the AFIA ID. This is actually quite a good error checking device. So for example, if you look in about halfway down, you can see that it hasn't found an AFIA ID for this particular entry, which might indicate that you've got either a typo in this case, or indeed the wrong species. So Fucus borealis only has one L, so it's just having a little flag there that it might not be the correct entry. The presence and absence information is important as a first pass. Like, that's really useful. If you can get greater levels of abundance, that's really, really useful for us. So counts or SAC4 scales or percent cover, or indeed densities. Percent cover especially is quite useful because it allows us kind of extent mapping. So depending on what area you've covered, some of the PMF definitions are based on percentage cover. So Merle, for example, has to have a specific percentage cover in order to qualify as a PMF. I think it's 5% off the top of my head, or with live or dead shells. And obviously it's a little bit subjective trying to understand it, or trying to identify exactly what 5% actually entails. But we ask to do your best. We've done surveys internally amongst NatureScot staff, excuse me, amongst NatureScot staff to look at percentage of seagrass cover, and somebody put together a quiz just to see what the mean and standard deviation of different scientists internally at NatureScot was for their observations of percentage cover of seagrass, and there is quite a wide variety even amongst those with PhDs, etc. So I would say just to not stress too much about the percent cover. Try and give it your best estimate, and if that translates into a priority marine feature, then that's great. Richard, I see you posted in the chat. Is that an APR ID? It's AFIA, so APHIA, AFIA, and I think AFIA is the name of the catalogue. It's just written in column P there at the top of the header. I think, yeah, column J as well is also really useful. So if you do happen to take images of videos of whatever it is that you've been observing, then if you have a picture, then it really helps us to have a look and say, okay, oh, that really does look like 20% cover, or there's been a typo here and it's definitely not 20%, it's more like 2%, or things like that. Just to help support the evidence base, it's really, really helpful for us. So any kind of images and videos are really helpful. That's for the verification, sorry, for the validation process. That said, we don't currently have the ability to host community-led videography and imagery. So we do ask, is that going to be what your question was about, Lucy? So we do ask you to hold on to that for the time being on the community group storage devices. Did you want to come in, Lucy, or has that answered your question?
No, I wasn't sure it was easy to just put it in the chat. I was just, is there a preference for which of the kind of abundance approaches that you use, or doesn't really matter as long as you just use one, as well as the kind of presence absence?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think ultimately it depends on which habitat you're actually looking at. If it's a habitat which tends to, if for example something like Merle, it's quite hard to quantify one individual unit of Merle, so you're obviously not going to do a count. So that leaves you either with, or you're not going to do a density either. You're either going to do SAC4 or percent cover, but because percent cover is numerical, I would really recommend doing that. I think SAC4 people often struggle with this one because it's a little bit more subjective, whereas percent cover, you can really sort of look at it, and counts are obviously, if you're counting things like you do some drop video and you can count sea pens, for example, that's great. You're not really going to do a percentage cover of sea pens on a sea floor. So it's kind of just applying a little bit of intuition to what you might think is best. I think I would generally go for a numerical entry where you can, but appreciate that's sometimes not possible. And if you if you're comfortable using SAC4, then by all means use SAC4. There are actually translation tables between percent cover and SAC4 for different species and habitats, but it gets into a kind of whole world of complexity because it differs depending on what you're looking at. So if you're comfortable with it, then SAC4 to help support the numbers, but else just the numbers would be really useful.
So sorry, can I just clarify? So if you were putting percent cover, would you want us to add SAC4 as well? Because I think with some of the data that we've got where we've maybe dropped down camera, but it's not still. So the thing, because the records we're collecting are also part of a citizen science engagement. So it's not necessarily you're deploying the method in the most sort of rigorous scientific approach. So we're trying to sort of achieve two things. So we find that our videos kind of cover ground, and we were just looking at one yesterday, actually, Helen and I, and we were kind of going through, and I sort of felt that actually SAC4 in many aspects was going to be easier to kind of work our way through than trying to actually give a percent cover.
I think that's absolutely fair. And if you're towing some gear or you've got the ROV down from a boat or whatever it might be, I think then SAC4 is probably easier to do. So I can recommend that. It will also be like, what's the best way of putting this? So if you're using, some stuff will be fairly obvious, and like between, it's not worth stressing between, is it completely correct? So if the MERL cover is between 20 and 25%, if the SAC4 is kind of occasional or frequent, there's a little bit of subjectivity in that, and different people will come up with different things. So I wouldn't worry too much about. We want it to be as rigorous as possible, of course, but some of this stuff can be a little bit subjective, and things change depending on, how much the turbidity of the water or lighting conditions and stuff like that. The observations can change. If you were diving down and putting quadrats down with a photo frame and proper equipment with lighting, then obviously would expect some slightly more accurate numbers. But certainly having the imagery to help kind of just validate those, I think, is really useful. But yeah, SAC4 is fine if it's on its own. Okay. Any other questions? A few questions in the chat. So Lindsay, is there public access to the records on Marine Recorder online? That's a good question. I'll take that one away. At the moment, it is a tenanted system. I think you can get an account, but it needs approval to be able to access individual tenancies. So let me take that away and find out. And second question, is NMPI still being used, updated with records? Yes, it is. But the process of getting to NMPI, i.e. through GEMS, is part of the same publication process within NatureScot. So it's not the fastest, but yes, it is still being updated with the records. Yeah. Okay. Should we move on? Probably skip the next slide because I've talked it through.
Ed, sorry, could I just ask you one question about the
yeah, please do.
The species tab.
Yeah.
So is it the case that if you when you put like the scientific name in, there's just an automated AFIA ID check within the spreadsheet system?
Yes, okay. That's the plan, so that you can tell if you've got a typo or yeah.
And does it matter if you have only the scientific name, or is it preferable to put both in, or does it not matter? Because we're tending to quite often have name as a kind of, as you're going through video, and then maybe picking up the scientific name second.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fine. So the headers there, so in the instructions tab, you'll see the headers of the different colors mean different things. So the blue ones are compulsory and the green ones are optional. So in this case, the green one for the common taxon, that's optional, but the scientific one has to be populated. But if it's helpful for your process and your workflow, putting the common name in first, I would definitely just do that. The other thing worth noting is that the taxa kind of change over time, so things get updated, and that can be a bit of a it's difficult. So we're working off the newest species list wherever we can. But I think that top one, for example, has been recently changed. I think that is the latest one, but I think black tar lichen has a slightly different, or used to have a slightly different scientific name, and it's just been updated. So it's just something to watch out for. But if you can't make it work and it's just saying no, then just ask me and I'll look into it and I'll figure it out. But yes, essentially the column P there is an automated check. So anything which is white, so the white columns are just automated and don't need populating. Lindsay.
Sorry, am I on mute or not?
I can hear you. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sorry, I thought I turned it off again. I just wondered, it's just going back to the NMPI, and I just wonder what the timescale is for getting stuff on MPI, because I think you're probably aware our data's gone into a black hole. So
I don't know. If you, yeah, I don't know exactly what it is, because it depends on the publication cadence within a different department within NatureScot. But I can try and find out for you. Is there I mean, we can pick this up in an email. Is there a specific data set that you're expecting to see?
I've just had a quick look on NMPI today just to see if some of our surveys had got there yet, and I mean, some have been more than 12 months and they're still not on there. So
right, okay.
I just wondered what was happening, whether it's.
If you message me with the specific records, and I can have a look. So some of them might not make it there, depending on the content of whether or not they contain priority marine features and Annex 1 habitats, I think. So I don't think everything will end up on NMPI necessarily. But by all means, message me with the individual survey specifics, and I can pick that up.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant.
Okay. Is that my bit? Do you want to take back over, Texa? Or?
I will do that. That was fantastic. I hope everyone is suitably excited about the updates to this process. We might run a little bit over for time, just as we finish up in the last few slides. So I hope that's okay for everyone. But we'll crack on. Let me just figure out where my mouse is. Excellent. So I think we've touched upon this a little bit in terms of quality assuring your data and validating it, and basically it's kind of the process that we just had a wee look at that spreadsheet there, looking at what is entered in there and making sure it makes sense. And it's always good, I think, to assign one or two people for this. It's never the most fun job, I have to admit, unless you're really, really into the spreadsheet stuff, but it's really, really valuable to do. And it does get easier with time as well. So I think I have a little example. The eagle-eyed of you might have spotted some of this already, as it was up on the screen just a minute ago. But for example, we've got channeled wrack in here at over 100%, which actually there are some cases where percentages can be a bit funny, but it is worth just double checking that those numbers make sense. The common limpet here, we've counted 5,000 of them. Now, could that be a couple of zeros extra, or were there very much 5,000 limpets in that quadrat, in which case I feel sorry for whoever had to count them. But again, checking your numbers is really important. We touched upon the kind of the scientific name, double checking that. The common limpet is in there incorrectly is actually the great white shark. So it's worth just double checking. If you follow the spreadsheet along to the AFIA idea, where Ed talked about if that comes across as a no, it might be that there's an error in your scientific name somewhere, and for this there's a double L in Fucus spiralis. So always worth having a wee look. Fresh eyes helps as well. Potentially someone who hasn't actually input the data, maybe just for eyes being fresh. So I guess actually this slide is probably now a bit moot, because we've kind of talked about how the data moves through the flow, through ED essentially, when it's passed to NatureScot and onto Marine Recorder Online. And one question that we do get quite a lot is once the data, we will discuss with you a data agreement in terms of, making sure the permissions are all in order. But what can the data then be used for? So obviously it can be publicly available, of course, and that's really important for visibility. Data can inform site condition monitoring, so designated sites, for example, especially if it's an updated observation on the health of something, can inform the priority marine feature status or the location. It can also provide information for caseworkers when they're assessing planning applications for certain things, and of course, improving general knowledge on a feature or an area. The data can also update anything that's old and provide new data for poor coverage sites. And then, of course, can ultimately help plan future survey and monitoring efforts, whether that's through more group effort and more group surveys, or NatureScot coming in with the monitoring team to have a look at something that has been flagged as well. So it's really quite a varied outlook on how the data can be used. So I think that this is probably something you've all been through, and kind of having an example of what you would kind of think about in terms of when you're starting off. And I just wanted to put a wee example in terms of how you'd start this process. And the question really simply for this example is, what is on our shoreline? And once that's the question, what you probably do then is have a wee look at the handbook potentially and find out a method that might suit that. So rock and shore quadrat sampling seems like a really good method there to answer that question. And we might have other questions that follow that in terms of, is there a change over time? So could we do this yearly, for example? Is there a change over season in terms of, could we run a survey, a transit at the site maybe once every 3 months? And then having a wee think again about our equipment needs. Do we actually have quadrats? Where could we get those? Could we borrow them? Can we buy them? Is there a fund available to apply to? And ultimately, in this example, the group that are doing this survey want to have a record of the biodiversity through their shore zones for their own comparison over time. And then again, thinking about where those data they're going to end up down the line, hopefully into Marine Recorder Online and on to other places, which we've spoken about. So I think we are, according to my slide countdown, we should be pretty much near the end, and we've had a few questions already, so thank you. But if there's anything you'd like to ask now, or any comments or anything in particular about kind of this topic, please now jump in and we can have a wee discussion from this point. So yeah, over to you guys. The floor is open. No questions, surely. Richard.
Hi. So that was really useful. Thanks for that, and great to see kind of what sits behind. So I guess I'm thinking quite with C-search forms in mind, because that's a lot of our data has been done via C-search, and then I've heard about this mysterious Marine Recorder Online, and there's a translation effectively from what we're putting into C-search forms through to this new system. But I guess one of the questions that kind of came up is access to the data and where the data gets pulled through to. And so it sounds like in that diagram, effectively everything's going to be joyfully joined together in one big happy family. So I up till now I've been looking at the NBN Atlas. Is that right? So previously that had data pulled through, but doesn't seem to have very much recently. From that pulls from lots of different databases. So So is there one, is there one ideal place for people to go to look for data once they've submitted it?
I'll take that one. In theory, you should be able to pick all of the data up at any point. But
Yes.
like I said, we are in a kind of, well, we Dash and NBN are in a kind of transitional phase for that particular agreement. So it might take a little while for the proper operational deployment of the tech needed to share that data between the two systems. But yeah, within it from NBN, you should be able to pick everything up within NBN and see where it's come from as well.
Because I guess that, so we're in the situation as well as having submitted a lot of forms and those forms not being available. So, but also, let's say we've done surveys for the whole area. We want to then see that on a map. And I guess we're at the point of, well, should we just do this ourselves versus is there going to be a neat place where we can just go to and all the data is going to be there? So I guess that's a question for, what's the future for this in terms of?
Yeah. So I don't know what the I don't know exactly what the strategy with regards to community groups having access to Marine Recorder specifically is. I don't know if there is, but I'll certainly find that out because we already had a question on that. Marine Recorder does have that kind of ability to see everything that you have. So within the tenancy for NatureScot, I can see all of the community group information plotted on maps for everything that's come through me and been submitted by me. So there is that functionality within the tenancy. I'd be interested to see what they think with regards to community group tenancies, because like you say, obviously it would be better to have everything in one place where possible than to have people, setting up their own or spinning up their own GIS servers, whatever it might be, which again
exactly.
is another reasonable way of doing it. The thing with C-Search is that it goes into Marine Recorder afterwards. So there's some of the regional coordinators who'll be taking the C-Search forms and translating that into with the same set of problems that I've been sort of dealing with and kind of tackling those solutions in a different way, because they're quite fixed by what they are asking of people on the C-Search forms. So they've got their own method for translating from one to the other, which is very complex and seems to have has had, I don't know about today, but has had a certain backlog with getting the forms into Marine Recorder as well. So it's each method brings with it its own set of challenges, unfortunately. But let me take that away and see what I'll speak to the team at JNCC and see what they think.
Yeah, it would be good. It'd just be good. I mean, obviously, it's continually changing, isn't it? It's the software, it's developing, and it's great that this is now. It is going to be online, but I mean, even knowing what the limitations will be will allow us to then plan. Okay, because down to the fact that going back to the data and the photos and the video that we've got, those seem valuable things to keep. So we're planning on trying to tie those to the locations that they've been. So at some level, we're going to have to manage those data anyway, in order to communicate with our community about, well, what is where and what, I think that's probably going to be something we're going to want to do in our region anyway, because that does seem a shame that there's no way of storing those like key images about, what the state of the seabed is or whatever.
I don't know what, again, with regards to Marine Recorder, I don't know what the future is with regards to attaching rich content, so images and videos to stuff in Marine Recorder, but currently it's not accepting any, presumably because it brings with it a vast, you're kind of opening enormous amounts of storage costs from allowing that. So I presume that's why there's a no policy to begin with, at least to begin with. But it's early days for the development, and it's taken several years for the development so far. So, and there's still a couple more years to go. But yeah, we'll get there.
Okay, thank you,
Lucy.
Lucy, yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask, is it set out anywhere in the handbook? It may be that I've just not really clocked it, or anywhere else, sort of what would be best practice in terms of like the kind of data validation or a QA process that we would go through if we're, because I'm thinking with the handbook methods and the transfer of data into the spreadsheet, is it actually is it set out in the handbook anywhere, or is it something that's available elsewhere?
That's a really good question, and I had a physical handbook just on me, which I've just given to the Murray Ocean community. So I'll be able to answer that immediately if I had it right in front of me. I'm not sure. If not, it's definitely something that maybe needs to be kind of laid out step by step, just as a kind of guidance. But yeah, let me look into that. That good point, though, Lucy. Thank you. Okay, well, oh, Lucy.
So just one thing, there's a couple of things. First thing was just picking up on what was being said about sea search data and how you deal with it, because we've got the same situation on Arran, and we've got a specific project running this year, Communities in the Sea. And actually what we're going to do is just create a kind of physical report. So literally a couple of paragraphs that will just, as we're going through the data inputting, just write a little description and insert a few photos or screen grabs from videos into that report, because we've got the same problem, is that it's great the data will go somewhere. We don't then have it, it's not in a format to share to the community. So that's a very basic approach we're using, but really interested to hear if other people have got other ways they've sort of shared the survey data through different kind of formats. Would be really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, great.
Rosalyn, have you got an example for Lucy there?
Yeah, that's exactly what we've done, Lucy. So we've done the Blue Mussel project, gathered data, have had a couple of discussions with Carol from NatureScot. So we've got the data, but we produced a mini couple of page report with photos so we could feed it back to all the community people who are gathering for us. So there's something back, because I think the worst thing you can do is just send data into a void and nothing comes back, because people lose heart. So yeah, we've done the same.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great points, and I think the importance actually sometimes of collecting imagery just for the sake of it almost is useful, because it allows you to show and tell what you have, and it really helps with getting more volunteers and keeping people's spirits up. So it's yeah, really important thing. Eris, have you got a question?
Hi, it's not a question. I just wanted to say before we leave, because Sarah from CCN had to leave early. So can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh no, my connection bad.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that like a huge thank you from Sarah and myself for Texa for doing this. I know there might still be more questions, but I wanted to jump in case you finished first. And to say that if anybody has anything from this that they want to bring back to Sarah at CCN to like take anything further, further questions that would, things that you might want to discuss within CCN itself, of those of you who are CCN members, please do get in touch with Sarah. I hope that's okay. I just put that in now.
Yeah, thank you. That's fabulous. Yeah, of course. That's really great. Yeah, has anyone else got anything they'd maybe like to add, or any other questions? Again, just give us an email if there's anything that comes to mind after this presentation. But if that is everything for you all, I think I'll stop the recording. If I can figure out how to do that without causing everything to crash. I might just leave it for now. I'll edit it out later. But anyway,
Can I just add a closing remark, if that's all right?
Of course, go ahead.
Just so with Texa, so Texa is moving on to another role. I'm still here, and so the community-led aspect is only about a quarter of my time. I have about a day and a bit a week to work on it. But it's really kind of, it's quite close to my heart. I go out and do sea search forms, and I go scuba diving, and I'm really dead keen for this to work. So if you have questions about your data and how's the best way of putting it in, or I'm really I really want to help. So please just drop me an email in the future if you have concerns about stuff, or just want to get things out, and yeah. And yes, Richard, I'll send around the new forms after this. Maybe tomorrow. Give myself a short break.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think we better wrap up because we are quite a bit over time, but really thank you everyone for your time tonight, and I hope this has been useful for you. And again, ping us an email with questions. And yeah, we really look forward to trying to improve this process. It's an iterative process. We're all trying to make this as pain-free as possible to get data from where you're collecting it into the appropriate place. But thank you again, and have a lovely rest of your evening, and speak soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.